budget clearinghouse for you to see this information, Democrat, Republican, individual that's concerned about what's going on here in Washington. Ms. Clarke?
Mr. Meek, I think you're being too kind. We have to put this where this is. You know, the president released his last budget, and this budget is devastating. It's a Republican budget that plunges our country deeper into debt, a debt that we will pass on to our children, our grandchildren, and maybe even our great-grandchildren if we don't turn this situation around and turn it around quickly. In the area of health care alone, the types of cuts in Medicare, Medicaid for our seniors and to low-income Americans, it's unconscionable. Again, we're facing a crisis in health care, and what are we seeing? Cuts. Cuts to the S-chip program that are almost $20 billion over the next 5 years. After all we've done to try to expand the program for all eligible children, the National Institute of Health funding frozen, just as we're about to, have some breakthroughs in research around Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease and cancer and heart disease and other diseases that we're desperately looking for treatment and cure for. I mean, in the area of education, and this is supposed to be the Leave No Child Behind administration. We see that the budget, it totally eliminates crucial programs that provide grants to the states for technology in classrooms. It eliminates vocational education programs altogether, completely eliminates the supplemental educational opportunity grants, Perkins Loans programs. I mean, our commitment to the development of our nation has to include a robust educational system. We are in competition with nations from around the world, and in other nations cranking out their engineers and their scientists by the hundreds. We're struggling to keep up. We're struggling to be competitive, and this Republican budget does nothing to aid in our cause to go forward in a robust manner. It reduces the funding for after-school programs by over 26%. These are the areas where our communities, our states, and across this nation need the support systems in place now that we have a 21st century society where parents are working, where they're not going to be there necessarily all the time at 3 o'clock to pick up their children from school. This is that period of time where all law enforcement agencies will tell you children get into trouble between 3 and 6 o'clock. Here we see this Republican budget does not take into account the realities of the lives of the constituents that we represent. And so we're going to have to bring that to the table and make sure that that is a part of the conversation as we move forward to shape what has been presented to us, which is really something that is devastating to our nation at this time. Homeland security. Now, this is an area that really hits home for me. Coming from New York City, knowing what has gone into just building out a new bureaucracy to address our concerns for safety and for real protection of our homeland, to hear after all that our first responders have done to really bring themselves up to speed to be able to meet the needs of their jurisdiction, to then have the federal government renege on its commitment to them, it's a shame and it's a sham. To cut assistance to firefighters, where local fire departments have needed equipment to keep our communities safe, is unconscionable. Totally unconscionable. For example, in New York State, where New York City's FDNY are considered national heroes, almost $32 million have been cut in funding. Where do they get that money from? Where are these departments around this nation going to be able to make up for the shortfall of the commitment made to them by our national leader? Unbelievable. Cuts to Homeland Security grant program, which funds every state based on risk by $750 million. You know, that's an ounce of prevention there. And we see it being pulled away. The important Urban Area Security Initiative, UASI, Homeland Security funding received an increase of only $5 million, which is not even enough to keep up with inflation. So, you know, what are we talking about here? I often hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and their concern about border protection. Well, this is it, folks. And it's the other side of the aisle that has turned the other way in addressing the priorities through this budget. Cuts to port security, critical transportation infrastructure, targeted infrastructure protection grants programs, and other important Homeland Security programs right before our very eyes. And one of the areas that I would have thought we would have really just taken a little time to get fixed up, the Office of Appeals and Redress, which was totally left out of the budget. This department is the department that is responsible for enabling us to travel across this nation. And for those who have unfortunately been put on the terrorist watch list, this is the area where just a little bit of funding would have made the difference between how we are currently conducting business that has shown a low value for our civil liberties and really bringing our processes up to date to meet the needs of real Americans. So it's devastating. This budget is not reflective of the needs that Americans have been talking about, are concerned about, and it's unfortunate. But it's my hope that we will push, we will move, we will negotiate so that we can get some of this turned around in time for it to make a difference in our lives. Just think about cuts to child care development block grants, when so many parents now need that extra assistance to be able to make sure that their families are well taken care of as they earn incomes to keep up with the cost of living. The low-income home energy assistance program, as my colleague Mr. Meek talked about, this is critical in the Northeast region where energy costs are skyrocketing, and we're seeing some of the worst record winters in my lifetime, perhaps in many folks' lifetime, and it's not only here but in the Midwest and up the whole northern seacoast. Social services block grants. These areas where our communities have been just sort of held together by a safety net continues to be cuts. And then, of all places, veterans health care. We talk so much about our concern and our gratitude to veterans, particularly in this time of war, and it is just so hypocritical to see the type of budget cuts that are taking place in terms of health care services for our wounded warriors. This is unbelievable. The Republican budget also assumes that the alternative minimum tax is not fixed. This assumes a significant increase in taxes for over 21 million Americans after 2009. 21 million Americans. And enacting a permanent fix to prevent this tax from taking effect will cost about $313 billion over the next 5 years. And it is something that we as Democrats are committed to doing. Yet, nothing. We receive nothing in this budget that indicates that we are gearing up to address this very important issue for working class Americans. The Republican budget does not contain accurate numbers for the cost of the Iraq War, as has been stated by my colleague, Mr. Meek. And the administration requested $70 billion But the average monthly cost of the war is over $10 billion a month. That means that the